is ask host. Can you either turn on recording? Oh, I see it.
You should have been able to as well, but
No,
I
it
turned
wouldn't
it
let
on
me.
and okay. I have it recording.
Okay, all right.
It's saving
So
it
Edicott,
to it.
repeat everything you said.
Right.
Well, some. Okay, so those who are just watching this recording, this is the Remembrance of Pavonia Massacre of February 26, 1643. And this is, what I can see, this is the 378th anniversary to the day of that, the completion of that massacre, and also the one at Corlear's Hook, which is on Manhattan, Lower Manhattan. And so Iroquois has relatives, close relatives, who were descendants of this massacre. And so now that we have recording, Iroquois, you just maybe in brief say what you said again to make
Okay.
it more clear to us.
It won't be the same because I never repeat myself.
Yes.
But okay, we had yes, Michael J. D'Amico was the late Sagamore, who is a descendant of Eliza Jane Kelly, who was the keeper of the 11 burial grounds of Farmington, Connecticut. The significance of Farmington, Connecticut is the home of the Tunguses, and that's where the survivors of the massacre at Pavonia went after the uh, the the men came back from the hunt. It's the custom at the end of winter for our people to go on the late winter hunt. And normally the whole family goes, but because of the Dutch uh, anxiety over relations with the indigenous, it was decided that only the men would go with the other people that were going on the hunt, and the women, children, and the old folks would stay behind. So they were massacred, and when the men came back, they were horrified. And this is actually the beginning of the Dutch Wars, but they eventually ended up in Connecticut with the Tunguses, who are, I won't say any more about Tunguses now, but we have been honoring the uh, the memory of the people who died in the Pavonia massacre and the other deaths, because that's not the only killings there were. And we, in 2008, in the end of February 2008, we had a major ceremony where we uh, brought in a lot of energy with, there were three people in the physical, and Mike D'Amico brought in a whole horde of people with him in the spirit, and they lifted up the energy of the entire location and healed the people that were waiting there, because the people that had been killed in the massacre were actually waiting for the warriors to return, and they never left the site. This is why we have ghosts, because people don't leave the location. But anyway, their energy levels were raised and they all departed for the next life, never to return. So we do no longer visit the site. The site was cleansed, although right now the energy has deteriorated since then because of the people living there. Humans control the energy of any particular geographic location, and it's their thoughts and intentions that actually affect the place. So we would encourage further healing of the site. We are have ceremonies just to help people release their grief, their trauma, to forgive themselves and anybody else connected with the event, which frees them from the ancestral grief they're carrying. And it does free all generations, past, present, and future, when there is a healing of a particular trauma. It heals everybody, and it usually heals the site. And that's why we encourage ceremony such as this to increase the healings on earth.
Well, thank you, Iroquois.
You're welcome.
Evan,
Like,
did you still want more background information?
go ahead, Nick. It's your turn.
Well, as Renee indicated, this all happened in the summer of 2013. And that was the summer honoring the 400th anniversary of the treaty between the Dutch and Haudenosaunee. And natives and non-natives went down the river from Albany to New York City, side by side in canoes and kayaks, never crossing each other, as the treaty belt that the Onondaga hold in their possession still to this day indicated that we should respect each other's culture, each other's traditions, each other's spirituality and history. And Renee, it was Paul Tobin that presented you the condolence pipe. I like to take credit for it, but it was Paul Tobin actually had made the pipes and presented to you. And that sort of began the reconciliation process. And for several years, I had hosted a green corn ceremony at the church that I served in Bloomington for many years. And then after I retired, Old Dutch came and invited me to present that celebration at the Old Dutch Reformed Church. And we have done that every Thanksgiving since. So that's how the reconciliation process continues on. And then in May of 2015, I remember Renee and I, Rob and Iroquois got together to talk more about where was this reconciliation process moving towards, or how do we move forward? And we made a statement that our desire is for increased cultural understanding, both past and present. Our desire is to become partners in healing our past and in being a force for healing of ourselves and our communities in the present. And we propose that we continue to meet as we focus on 4 different questions. What is the truth about your peoples that you need to tell and repent of? Secondly, what is the harm that each of us has caused the other, and how has there been healing? What still needs healing? Thirdly, what are the misunderstandings each about the other that need to be named? And what are the myths we hold about ourselves and or each other that need to be explored and or exploded? And then fourthly, what are the positive core values that each of our peoples have and continue to live from? And those are the thoughts that we thought about. And then in May of 2018, statements were made by the Old Dutch Reformed Church Consistory. And then I returned a statement from the Association of Native Americans to the Old Dutch Church. And so we still honor, hopefully, those questions today. And that's the reason why we're still meeting and talking about the Pavonia massacre and how that has affected still, centuries further on, or decades further.
In 2018, I believe it was when the Renee, you read a statement from the church.
Yes.
Do you have that?
I have it if she doesn't.
I have the statement. That it was actually read on March of 2018.
Well, I have May 2018. Okay.
I think, yeah, it was by the consistory has the date of March 18th.
Okay.
Can you read that?
Yeah. And I think, Evan, you had published it only because we had drafted it, but we had not officially voted on it. So I think it was in February when it was first sort of read, and then it was affirmed by the consistory later on. But you got the privy knowledge of the first draft to have to go over it.
Well said. And also I wanted it to resonate with the date, February 26th, somewhat, so that it wasn't too much
Right.
far after that. And I believe that I really appreciate it that the church made like what turned out to be a very eloquent and bold statement concerning the truth and reconciliation, specifically with, I guess, Pavonia. And Renee read it at our gathering as, I guess, a draft, right? And then when it was approved, that was even more powerful because you had the whole church community standing behind it. So
That
I never forget that.
Yeah, so that's when Nick has the date of May. That's when that happened in May, when we read it collectively.
Wow. Okay.
And then I responded with a statement.
Right.
Well, who wants to read it? This seems like a good time. Whoever wants to read it. I don't have it with me.
I'm prepared to read it.
Okay, Rob.
This is a statement of apology and reconciliation. On this, the 18th day of March, 2018, on behalf of and with our Dutch ancestors, we, the consistory of the Old Dutch Church, acknowledge that we failed to live up to the promises made to First Nation peoples and the two-row wampum treaty. We acknowledge, confess, and lament that we took life, took land, failed to live in equality, friendship, and peace, failed to honor and respect the values, spirituality, and way of life of our Native American neighbors. We misunderstood, dehumanized, and exploited these brothers and sisters who welcomed us to their homeland. Over time, we imposed our own values, religion, language, culture, and way of life, making these the dominant and controlling force in which we would live our common life. We are truly sorry for these actions, both intentional and unintentional, and we apologize for the loss, suffering, and grief they brought upon our First Nation sisters and brothers. To those from the Association of Native Americans of the Hudson Valley and to Nitap Kitap, who have shared this journey towards reconciliation and renewed commitment, we humbly express our deep gratitude for your willingness to eat, talk, teach, listen, sing, give thanks, and dance together, and for your gracious forgiveness. We commit ourselves to labor with you to fulfill the vision of the 1613 Two-Row Wampum Treaty, to live in a relationship of equality and respect that honors your wisdom, culture, spirituality, and way of life, and honor the creator of all that is. We pledge ourselves to row with you down the river of life, seeking the welfare of all people, all creatures, and our precious Mother Earth. For as long as the sun shines, as long as the water flows downhill, and as long as the grass grows green. Adopted by the Consistory of the Old Dutch Church, March 18th, 2018.
You want the response from
Yes.
Anna?
Yes.
When European settlers brought Christianity to this continent, they strongly communicated to the indigenous people that they needed to become believers. They must give up their culture and their identity and become white. Historically, our government and its representatives have consistently broken treaties and trust with indigenous nations. Walls of anger, hurt, and mistrust resulted. Many Native people heard stories from relatives and friends of how their families and tribes were affected by policies of state and church, still felt to this day. Walls of communication, misinformation, and stereotypes must continue to be broken down and replaced with trust and acceptance to make way for the respect of and honoring of each other's culture. We must be willing to listen, to learn, something many failed to do in the past. It is a two-way street, for we both need to honor the creator of all that is and live in harmony with all of life. Reconciliation had been long overdue. We started that process in 2013 with the presentation of a condolence pipe. It was and still is time to reach out to build relationships, to love our neighbors. Life among Native peoples is first of all relational. Relationships take time. There must be commitment to friendship for the long haul, which we will continue to honor. We will continue to move boldly forward, yet humbly, because we know the Creator's heart is for all nations and peoples of the world to coexist peacefully. And at that time, I had two canoes made by the clay of the Pamunkey River, Virginia. One I placed in our bundle of the Association of Native Americans, containing various items of our history. The other I presented to the Old Dutch Reformed Church to be placed next to the condolence pipe, to remind us of our traveling together in the river of life, living side by side with all that our Creator has blessed us with on Mother Earth.
Okay. Yep. Well, thank you, Nick.
Yep.
Yeah, and I want to say about the two-row. It was, I think, 39 years later, after the Dutch had agreed, and the Mohicans with the Mohawks at Tawaganshi Hill, so they would not interfere with each other's canoes. And then, of course, is when Pavonia happened. It was a violation of the treaty, and so we're still in the process of straightening all that out. And what happened in 2013 was, or 14, I guess it was, when we did the renewal, was nothing short of a miracle. We had tens of thousands of people involved. And one of the things that I understand was that, and recently confirmed, that when fracking became a practice in New York, the Onondaga felt that was a violation of the two-row, because fracking goes through cracks and goes and affects the health of uninvolved people. And so they felt very strongly about that. But also another thing, that once we've reached that point of of repentance, of softening our hearts towards others and softening our hearts toward the death of others, then also we could soften our hearts towards Mother Earth and ask apologies from Mother Earth. And when I started working with the Mi'kmaq or Micmac people, I was very impressed with the fact many prayers were to asking forgiveness from the four-leggeds and the two-leggeds and the birds. And so I continue to do that. And I want to say that yesterday, a very positive thing happened that actually relates directly to the two-row, which many of us here were familiar with. And that is, I went on this Zoom cast that had to do with this kind of resolution that had been made to do massive amount of fracking and transportation in the Delaware River Basin. And it was agreed upon. And on this Zoom yesterday, the same people, the governors of 4 states and their secretaries came together and signed a paper saying they would never frack again or transport fracking in that area. And that is really something that the two-row can take to heart as a definite accomplishment. That one of the things that came out of the two-row wampum campaign was an awareness, bringing truth about some of the practices that harm the earth to tens of thousands of people. And so it's finally coming home to roost in a good way. And so the Delaware, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania all swore from the top, swore as that we won't do this fracking here again. And so that's part of what two-row was about. But also, of course, the original treaty had to do with people and being sensitive to the needs of others and their freedom of life, to free to live as they wish and not interfere with their path, but to stand beside them in a way, just to go along on a separate path. So I want to say to JD and Charlene, perhaps you could call Uncle Vinny, because he had said he would be able to be a speaker, and I never heard from him. So you know his number, right?
I think JD does. JD will call him for you.
Okay, I would appreciate it.
Who's that?
Vinny,
Vinny.
Kiki Manitou?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I know.
Yeah,
ask him to get on the call.
okay.
All right, give JD a minute.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, a number of our speakers haven't come yet. So I wonder, does anybody have something any of our speakers want to add to all that? Renee, Rob, Carol, Wahaba.
Yeah, I'd like to also talk about a conversation that Sally Avery and I have had about our reconciliation statement, and we were asked by a group of Ulster County historians to come and speak about it, and it was to encourage other historical organizations to do likewise, to start questioning where reconciliation is possible. So I also think like what we are doing together also is inspiring other people to ask the same kinds of questions. So it has also taken on new life besides what we have found in each other. And one of the important things that Sally and I discussed, and I've also discussed with Pastor Nick, is about the continuation. We don't believe reconciliation is reconciliation if it has an end date. Reconciliation is something that goes on. And so therefore, we're all coming together to make sure that that happens. And an evening like this gives us opportunity to continue the act of reconciliation. And it also builds community. And we're hoping also to join other events in the future. We have agreed to come and be with Anna at Seed Song Farm for the summer equinox. So I think that is something we look forward to. And that we thank Pastor Nick for making that invitation, because we also want to be out in the ground on the soil. That's important to both Native people and for our church, because we are about creation and about care of creation. And that is one of the things we also pledged, where we would have similarities. And so wherever there are issues caring for Mother Earth, it is something that we can join force to do together. And it gives us a good opportunity to continue our reconciliation process by, again, caring for the community.
Okay, thank you. No, another.
I have an additional statement to make if you.
Yes.
I think that there still exists an insensitivity to the mistreatment of Native American peoples in some areas of our country, and at times reflected by the racism of the dominant culture. And this is evident particularly in the areas of the Southwest and northern Midwestern states. And because of the historical past, many areas continue to exist in deprived areas economically and socially. And so stories still need to be told and to be heard. And for many people, these stories represent past history and therefore maybe not relevant to today. So there's still a lack of knowledge of current Native American history and current insensitivities to Native culture history today. Examples: mascots, abuse of Native lands, pipelines, excavation of land for oil, uranium mining, etc. You can go on and on. Many struggle with realities of inadequate housing, joblessness, health problems, and you can go on and on. So there still exists a disrespect, I think, for Native spiritual traditions and ceremonies also. So I guess the question we all still need to keep ahead of us is, what are the future challenges facing Native American people as well as the English Dutch people?
Yes. So a lot was said about could be said about the mascot issue, and I was just, each situation is different with each different teams, but the teams making over $1 billion a year these days. I was realized that we're talking about the Super Bowl, Kansas City Chiefs, which they have a mascot with a Native American face and an arrowhead and everything, but people don't realize that in 1830, Kansas City, Missouri was basically a Native American village with many Kansas City Chiefs there, real people with real feelings. And then what happened was a person named Andrew Jackson became president. And sometimes we find that presidents can have, an effect, especially in terms of their policies with Native people. And so there was the Removal Act of 1830. And so all those shiny people were thrown out of Kansas City, and they went to Kansas, where they had tried to set up some reservations, but then settlers came sweeping through Kansas, and they went off in all directions and ended up in Oklahoma. But those Kansas City Chiefs were basically sent helter-skelter, as it turns out, because of the Removal Act. So you have to know a lot of history to understand some of the pain and so the cultural traumas that are going on, like simply watching the Super Bowl and having that, yo, I mean, that can hurt. If you were one of the descendants of one of the 1830 Kansas City Chiefs who got basically run off into nowhere, and some of them did starve, well, a few of them, many never reached Oklahoma. I'm just saying, this is why we talk about history, because it can sometimes change the picture and change the sensitivity. Just, to add that. Anybody comments? Iroquois? Oh.
Sorry, I was muted. I was just thinking about the mascot that came out of the Boston area. That's now the Redskins, the Washington, D.C.
Yep.
Because one of the issues I don't have a problem removing that mascot, but I do have a problem with people drawing a line through it and being disrespectful, because it is the image of a real life Mohican Sagamore out of the Boston area, because we actually covered a large area.
Yes, that's right.
Might as well call us Algonquins, whatever, but it's a real person. So we do not like disrespecting the image. We don't mind it being used as a symbol of a football team, because many of our people have played football, quite a few professionally. But we do not like the disrespect that is shown and the fun that is made of any image of a Native American. It should not be a matter of disrespect. It should always be used respectfully. And like you said, the Kansas City Chiefs, yes, there were a lot of people, a lot of indigenous in Kansas. We had the Cleveland Browns, I think, were the Cleveland Indians. They were Indians. Yeah. These teams were named for Native people because the Native people were playing on them. So we do need understanding. It needs understanding on all sides, that there is no one size fits all. People are diverse. Families are diverse. Nations are diverse. Even the area at Pavonia was diverse. Most of the people there could be properly called Mohican, but some of them were not. Some of them were not even Algonquin, because we had people, we traveled a lot, we moved around and we intermarried. We did not marry close relatives. We married, more distant people. We're all related, but not all that close. So it's something to remember, and people need to be aware of the great diversity we have, and that most images should be respected unless they're an image of evil, which is not something we like. And it looks like Charlene has a response.
Okay, Charlene.
Well, I was just going to ask because now there was a problem with Ontario School District with their mascot. And I believe just this last summer or the summer before, they changed it. And Cohonson, their Little League team,
Has changed.
has also changed. Their Little League team used to be, well, Little Indians, wasn't it, JD?
Where a native symbol,
With a native symbol.
like on the base.
And now that's been changed. And I'm not sure why.
It's probably political pressure or the desire to be correct. Because strictly speaking, many people who are of indigenous ancestry deny it. Actually, they don't accept it. They don't acknowledge it. My mother denied it to her dying day, but she was Lubicon Cree. But it was very dangerous when she was growing up to be a quote unquote Indian. You could get killed easily. It was legal into the 1970s to kill an Indian in New Jersey without reason. It was legal. It's on statute, no law, So people should not loosely use native terms to apply to stuff that's not native.
Right.
It's like I don't really say I'm indigenous. I say I'm Mohican, because we Mohicans don't have any formal relations with the United States. So, and they pass laws about calling yourself native. Well, that's okay. We won't. We're Mohicans. So it's different. It's like you, Charlene, have a certain last name and you use it. You don't expect somebody else to use the same last name willy-nilly. It's
Right.
not like anybody else is entitled to use your name. So it's the same with indigenous people. We should not be calling strangers by a certain family. It's just not right.
Okay.
The thing about Onteora, so I know a lot about that, there were actual fights breaking out on the school board that would go on for hours. And then they had to just stay up and not go home until they'd finished their business. It was very obstructive. And it was very divisive and a lot of hostility on the school board. And finally, what happened, and this is very interesting and very relevant, it was only the children who could resolve this fight. It was 50-50 and no resolution. And one of the children just heard about all this and said, well, I can fix this. And he went and got all the students together and they wrote a little petition and says, we don't need to be the Onteora Indians. We want to be the Eagles. And it happened almost immediately and it was resolved. And so that's like a kind of a story, a teaching tale that's actually a true story. And what I find is, and this is also true, is the Ketchum Indians in Wappingers. The Ketchums, this is another whole different scenario where I happen to know the Ketchum, there was a man named Can't Ketchum. He was Wappingers, Lenape, and he became part of the Lenape group, went west, and his descendants were all great generals and leaders, and they helped the United States win all those wars. But back at home in Wappingers, a lot of the kids in the school were actually also descendants of Hank Ketchum and the other Wappingers Ketchums, but they had all gone underground. And so they had secret codes and they sat together in groups of 10 or 12 right in a classroom and all kind of, making secret little signs to each other, and nobody knew. And so when another the same people who kind of stopped the Indian Valley Indians in Cohonson went in there and said, well, this is all wrong and we can't have this. And so
Right.
they had a fight over that. And I was involved in that too. And just as an observer, but they took a poll and it was 50-50. And some of the people who didn't vote were the Ketchums. They didn't have the last name Ketchum necessarily, but they had other names, and they all knew, and they all lived together, not only sitting together in class, a lot of them lived in groups of individual houses on fields that once were their cornfields. So it's often 50-50. So the thing is that, if you think there's one side to this, remember that there are people on the other side who also think there's only one side. And it can be very explosive. And we're finding this. And Dennis Yeri is somebody in our community who knows quite a bit about all this. And I actually asked him these questions recently, is that, it's, don't underestimate how strongly people feel about the mascot issue, just as if in 1861 you went on wandering through the South and say, hey, everybody, how do you feel about slavery? It's almost that explosive. And it takes generations to remove a mascot, and the reasons are complex. So, we need to have a lot more discussion, a lot more sensitivity. I actually grew up as a Redskins fan, and I didn't know there was another team. Really, we had Sonny Jurgensen. Why worry about anyone else, But I didn't realize even then what Redskin really meant. But in Boston, it was the Redskins was a kind of a bean that they sold out of Boston. So it wasn't even racial at the beginning, but they had another team called the Boston Beans. So it didn't start out that racist. And there was a man named Dallas Dietz, by the way, who owned the team. And he would go out to the 50-yard line at every game with a huge Lakota style headdress. And he would dance around and he would go boo and all that, and everyone would cheer. And then when he died, they found out he was German, by the way. And Joe Bruchac discovered that. It's like every single story is a different story. And when you talk to somebody, it's good to give them the space to express themselves and listen. And maybe, you can add another view, but I don't know if it's going to be something you're going to change somebody immediately. And I just realized that the Mets have a white guy as the mascot, and that, that's pretty a whole other story. But, this is an interesting thing. It's not totally out of left field to talk about mascots, because we're talking about sensitivity and atonement to feel, how you say, apologetic, the right moment in the right way, and not guilt. It's a different thing. So we have another, I've seen Sally, Paul haven't been able to get on. I don't know what's with that. They're with Truth and Reconciliation people.
And Evan, JD could not get a hold of Vinny. He left a message.
Okay. All right. Maybe you could call Sally and Paul. Oh yeah, Renee.
Well, you can finish what you were saying. Call Sally and what?
Oh, I can call Sally now. I'll see what the problem is. Okay. So.
Okay.
I
just have a question for you, Ilikwa.
Yes.
Part of what you were saying about the Mohicans is something I don't know about when you said that the Mohicans are not indigenous.
No, we don't label ourselves as native. We've been here for 12,500 years. But where we came from before we came here,
yeah,
the continent in the mid-Atlantic that sunk. Where we came from before that, we lived with the Onondaga and the Woolly Mammoths. So yeah, we are North Americans. We've been here for 30,000 years. We are here as well. The Micmac have been here as long as we have been here. We know the Hopi have been here longer than we have. But we don't label ourselves native simply because the federal government of the US Inc. says you have to have papers. We don't have any papers. We don't use paper. Paper is meaningless. We go by your genetics. So we go by family history. The first thing we do when we meet somebody new is find out how we are related to them. That's what we normally do. And who cares after that? You're a relative. It doesn't matter. So it's just a different way of looking at things. And we don't follow the paper for the last 300-400 years. We don't follow their paper. We've always acquired the paper. The Tunks just asked for the papers of the English in Farmington, Connecticut, so we could figure out how to get around it.
Hmm.
We always study the people that have come. So we've managed to survive. We just don't tell anybody. But that's also why we forgive, because we are aware. If you don't forgive a person who has wronged you, you're the one that loses because you carry the wrong, you carry the trauma. The way we forgive, you must first love yourself, forgive yourself, then you love the other person or group or whatever and forgive them. That's the basic 4 steps in resolving trauma. That's how you let go of the trauma you carry from a particular event or occurrence. So, and that's the way we live.
Mhm.
We don't have stomach problems. So,
Thanks, Idikwa.
you're welcome.
And thank you, Nick, for the very careful and thorough history of that reconciliation process.
There's a long tradition of truth and reconciliation, and there's a commission that Sally and Paul are on. I'm sorry they can't seem to be here, but that might be them. So go ahead, Nick, if you wish.
Join in. Chile do de, Chile do de, hey, oi. Chile do de, Chile do de, hey, oi. Shuge, shuge, eoskote, wadaha, 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 ode, Chile, ode, ode. Shuge, shuge, eoskote, wadaha, 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 ode, Chile, ode, ode. Chile do de, Chile do de, oe, oe. Chile do de, Chile do de, oe, oe. Shuge, shuge, eoskate, wadaha, 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 ode, Chile, ode, oe, shuge, shuge, eoskate, wadaha, 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 ode, Chile, ode, oe, Chile do de, Chile do de, oe, oe. Chile do de, Chile do de,
Thank you, Nick. Yeah. Okay, so Sally and Paul, do you want to start now, or do you want to wait for a minute and get settled?
We can speak now. One of the things that's been going on in and beginning to happen more and more in this country and in Canada and is truth commissions abound on Native American grievances and horrible things that have happened to people. They tend to involve incidents where there are people who are still alive who have a memory of the incident. So the biggest one was in Canada with the Indian residential school things, residential schools where there are people who are still alive today who were part of those schools, and who really affected their lives, their children's lives, and their grandchildren's lives. And so Canada had a very impressive truth commission. And so, I mean, there was a very wonderful truth commission in Maine with the Wabanaki people, Wabanaki Federation, about even more recent terrible things where the Maine social services removed children from their homes. So that's just one of the things to try to bring some justice. Again, it's very important, the kind of work that Evan, you've been doing, and having the Pavonia massacre, bringing these things to light and learning about them, because actually what's happening more recently is not that different from massacres and horrible things in the past. And that there's a chain, a historical chain for all these things. So I'm involved with truth and reconciliation circles that are right now. There's just last week, there was a program that actually there were 700 people. I think a lot of them were college students, but they were involved. They were part of a big Zoom presentation where there were speakers, including myself. And so I think it is something that it's good for people to learn about it, to know about it, and to see if there are ways we can, bring or participate in some larger ongoing truth commissions, or develop things ourselves around here. I mean, if Evan or if anybody has particular questions, it would be good for me to.
Oh, questions. Oh, well, one thing, Sally, you and I had a conversation about this. I thought was very fruitful, about the difference between truth and reconciliation in the practical sense, in the practical world, in terms of making things happen, making change happen, but having gatherings and commissions.
Right.
It's got a very different level of expectation, right?
Oh, you mean the difference between truth and reconciliation?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, everybody really wants truth to come out. That's the fundamental thing especially for all people who have been victimized, or who are concerned about people who've been victimized. Having the truth is really, really important. Reconciliation is kind of has a lot of actually contradictory meanings. Because you don't want to have people reconcile to an unjust situation. That's a lousy outcome. So, I mean, but basically my understanding of what, I mean, it's still a murky concept, but the way it's happened in various truth commissions that I've been witness to is, or part of, is it's people hearing each other, and it becomes it can lend to a stronger community where people understand each other and respect each other's and know about the kind of injustice things and the pain and the destruction that's caused in people. So, but it is still a murky conversation.
Can I say something on that?
Yeah, please.
You know,
Paul
when I
Bermanson.
put up you and a few others on the screen, I don't know that I was shot in Greensboro, and I participated in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission there as a witness, as a victim, and since then I've seen a lot of value to it. And the pairing of truth and reconciliation can sound very shady, because it sounds like, excusing things. Forgiving is one thing, but excusing, accepting, reconciling oneself with injustice is something else.
Right. Bad.
But what the reconciliation, the way it worked out in Greensboro was very interesting, because what happened was a lot of people who didn't know each other, but were outraged at what had happened, were able to come together. And the reconciliation happened among people on our side. One thing that they've talked about in a lot of places, including South Africa, where the Truth and Reconciliation Commission really first took off in a big way globally, was that the perpetrators are very eager for reconciliation. They want to do a hug and say, it's all behind us.
Right.
Everything is okay now. But it's not. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission needs to open up the truth so that people can find the proper way to seek some justice. I mean, we had 5 people killed in Greensboro. There's no justice that can come out of that. They're dead. They shouldn't be dead. They should be hanging around with their grandchildren. So the reconciliation thing for us was, I became closer friends with people who went through the thing with me, because we recounted the incident. We talked about what had happened to us, and we recognized, our common experiences more closely. That was very strong in the Canadian TRC about Indian residential schools, where there were hundreds and thousands of Native people talking about their experience in the Indian residential schools. And they and their families reconciled a lot, because one of the things that all that trauma produced in the people who had been in those schools was they were very withdrawn, and they talked very little. And a lot of them felt that they really weren't able to be parents in the way that they wanted to be, because they were so cut off from their own emotions. But when they testified, it was very powerful, very moving. And a lot of people in the families of those who testified found themselves a lot closer to those who testified. And that was a very deep form of reconciliation. It was a bringing closer together of people who had suffered through this massive injustice, or this massive history of injustice, because it wasn't just one injustice. So it's like Sally said, it's a very murky meaning, but I've come to see that there's a real positive aspect to it. I mean, when we first started talking about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, my position was very clear. I am not interested in reconciliation. I don't want to hug some Klan guy who shot me. I'm not interested. And then what came out was so much more all-sided and deeper than that I ended up changing my view of the thing.
And also just in Canada, I mean, I thought what you said, I really agree with what you said, but there was, I mean, since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which went on for 5 years and had big events all across the country. And then what happened? I don't know more. A great big social movement.
Right after that.
Yeah, a year after it ended. And then there've just been all these massive organizing against, pipelines and all kinds of stuff of people who are really connected with each other in a much stronger generationally. So
yeah, Truth Commission, I think Canada really shows that a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is not necessarily, I mean, it can be a formula for covering things up. There's no doubt about that. But it can also be a way of mobilizing people for bigger and broader struggles than they've had before. It's a very complex process, and it's beyond me to itemize exactly what needs to happen for it to go one way or the other way. but I've seen it go one way.
A good
And
way.
I've seen
Good
it go in a good way a number of times.
What about Dawnland, the film? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, we through the people. I want to say something about Greensboro and then Dawnland. You know, we were survivors of the Greensboro massacre. And one of the things that was really great about that Truth Commission is they published a report, which was this thick. I mean, it was really detailed.
Over 500 pages.
Yeah, 500 pages. It was really, really good. And basically that has percolated through the Greensboro and the region so that a lot of people, it's so that the summary of what happened in Greensboro in the massacre has changed. And now here it is, like over 40 years later.
Almost 42 years.
This fall, after, you know, the Greensboro City Council finally acknowledged that they asked for forgiveness for their part in support, you know, what happened in the massacre. And that was amazing. And so it really changed over a long period of time. It took a while, but it changed how people saw that history. And then of course, now that we were attacked by Nazis and Klansmen who killed 5 people and almost killed Paul. And now that's happening, you know, in the Capitol building, you know, that now they're the Proud Boy, all these other things that are really very Nazi and Klan type organizations are really threatening a lot of people. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's what was happening in Greensboro. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, those are just some things. And Dawnland, finally, Dawnland was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Maine with the Wabanaki people, where after the residential schools were shut down, one of the things that continued to happen was social services would remove Native children from their homes and adopt them out to white families. And a woman that we met through Truth and Reconciliation circles lived, you know, she's Native and living in Maine. And she and her 4 sisters, one time when they were all young and her mother was at work, social services came in.
She was 7.
She was 7 years old, probably in the middle of those 4 or 5 girls. And social services came in and removed them from their home and put them in a foster care situation.
Basically kidnapped them.
Yeah, they were kidnapped, separated from their mother. And it was horrific. They went through years and years of just being torn apart. And one of her sisters actually committed suicide based on it. I mean, it was really tragic. And so she was one of the people who testified at that Maine Wabanaki Truth Commission. And it was very powerful for her, very powerful to bring out what had happened to those children. And there's a beautiful movie made about it called Dawnland.
That's really worth seeing.
Which the Old Dutch Church in Kingston has a copy. They bought a copy of it, so it is available.
And that was somehow connected to one of our Pavonia
yes, that's right.
remembrances.
That's right.
It's all connected, right?
It's all connected.
It is all connected.
It is. It's really the same kind of thing still going on.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for your wonderful, amazing words. You've really been active and involved in this whole process, and you are elders, and we thank you.
Well, it's been very healing. I think it's been very healing.
We're glad you're here.
Thank you. We're glad to be here. but it really is going on. The Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and all the rest of these groups are direct lineal descendants of the Klan, and they're all becoming increasingly Nazi.
Mm.
I mean, the U.S. has a serious Nazi problem.
Yeah.
There is a serious Nazi problem in the U.S., and it's not going away just because Trump is now going to be living in his palatial estate in Florida. People should look up Mar-a-Lago. It looks like Versailles on steroids.
Mhm.
It's quite something.
Well, Paul, in terms of, I don't think this is too far off topic. We're talking about, the effect of a trauma like this on 7 generations, and I understand you're not Native American, but you're Jewish, and do you have any particular insights about, in your own experience, how what happened to the Jews during World War II has affected you and your community?
Well, it happened to my grandparents, and
Yes.
I grew up with no aunts and uncles. Both my parents were in concentration camps during the war, and their entire families were killed off. The only survivor, well, each of them had like 5 sisters and brothers. So I should have had a very big family, but they were all killed. So I grew up with no aunts, uncles, grandparents, or cousins. I was very aware of that. And both my parents were deeply affected by what happened and had a big impact on me. So that my mother couldn't stop talking about it. She was really constantly, compulsively talking about it. And it really drove her off the deep end on a lot of levels.
Mhm.
And that had a profound effect on me. I mean, really, it was, I spent my whole life, and I'm still to a considerable degree under the shadow of that. When I say the United States has a Nazi problem, I'm not saying something lightly. What the Nazis did was kill millions of people, and it threw millions of people into complete emotional disarray for generations. And my own daughters. I mean, we have my younger daughter, who was not even born when I got shot. We have this extraordinary photograph of her in kindergarten, getting her first school photograph,
Oh, gosh.
and she looks horrified. And for years, couldn't figure out what, she didn't talk about it, what was going on. Finally, a number of years ago, she said, when they lined her up to be photographed, you want to get the
I'm
picture?
gonna have a picture.
Sally's getting the picture. When they lined her up to be photographed, she said she was sure she was going to be shot.
Oh, boy.
You know what I'm saying? It's not
He's 4th-generation Holocaust.
third.
Third.
It's
Okay.
her. She knew her grandparents.
Okay.
This is Sandy's school photo.
It's actually preschool.
Preschool photo.
But look at that face. She's really like,
She's scared to death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, this is not something that goes away, and it's passed on a million ways. I was a psychiatrist, and it so happened that I worked in a Jewish hospital for my residency, and with no forethought at all, the guy I worked with, who was the chair of the department, wrote the first paper on multi-generational trauma from the Holocaust. He was the original author on the subject. So I got to work with the patients he was writing about. It was really, really interesting. And people were deeply affected, even though they hadn't themselves gone through what their parents went through. They shared that experience because your parents tell you all these stories when you're a kid. And you have that. And you can't necessarily put it in perspective when you're 2 or 3 years old. And some people can never put it in perspective. And it just remains this kind of hammer on the head to them. And that gets passed along generation after generation. The Native American thing, the level of the efforts of the United States government and so many others to exterminate Indian people in order to claim the land is extraordinary. I mean, I've read an enormous amount about that, and it's an extraordinary saga of the most treacherous and vile behavior by the people who ran the country at that time. and at this time, because it's an ongoing assault. But I think that the idea that the trauma goes away after a generation, things like this don't go away.
Mm-mm.
They don't go away. It's to the tremendous credit. And here's the thing that I think Jews and Native people are very similar. Both have a very kind of funny, wacky sense of humor. I think that's a large part protective, and it's very effective. But I think that the experience is something that doesn't go away. It's really stamped on people, and it continues. So I know my grandsons are gonna experience that because they've been, asking me questions about what happened and why it happened to me, and they haven't really gotten the whole story about my parents yet from their mother, who did get the whole story from her grandparents
Mm.
or my parents. So it's you can see it going from generation to generation, but you can also see it lasting centuries because this is not something that goes away. It's something that's imprinted on people.
I'm going to share a story that's from a different culture. I traveled with my father in England and Wales, and there was a very unusual incident. Well, my father was a historian, and we went out to this remote rural area where there were Irish and Welsh people living in little stone huts, with growing their plants and whatever. And my father kind of went right up to these people who were outside. He started talking, and I was there, and I didn't understand what was being said, but they were telling the story, and they're pointing, and they're very animated, became all emotional, and said, "Yeah, and Stick and Billy came through that door, and his brother came through that door, and we hid in the basement, we hid in the corn crib, and we were terrified." And my father was like, "Oh, that's terrible. I'm sorry to hear that." And then they left. I said, "Dad, what the heck are they talking about?" "Well, what they're talking about happened 300 years ago, son, but they're still seeing it. It's right in front of them in their yard because these people had been living in the same house for 300 years." And they told the story on and on to the survivors, and it was still an emotional experience for them. And then
That is a great story
That is.
for not only because of what we're talking about, but because Ireland was where the English invaders perfected the methods that they used later on the Indians
yeah,
who
yeah.
came to the Americas. I mean, it's very clear. And they used the same tactics on Black people whom they enslaved.
Well,
So the trauma and the tactics of colonialism both are passed along from generation to generation.
I want to add that what this builds up to, the same thing happened when I was traveling through Virginia, and I was looking for some of this particular tribe, and and so I found somebody by their last name, and I went over and talked to this fellow who is a descendant of this particular, it was a Lumbee tribe, and I said, "So, did you have troubles here?" And he started telling me detailed stories of Andrew Jackson coming right up there and stealing the young people, tying them to trees and burning them alive. And all these stories came out in incredible detail. And I said, "So when would this happen?" "Oh, this was 1820s. Yeah, right here in Virginia." So
Wow.
it's amazing how this whole, I mean, it's part of a healing process, but at the same point, it doesn't disappear. And so
Right.
that's part of what,
And remember, Andrew Jackson was Donald Trump's favorite president.
Yes,
okay. So we're not out of the woods yet.
that's right.
No.
Certainly not.
But anyway, those two stories kind of fit together for me. And now it's not the only time too. There's, when you talk to Native elders, sometimes you get these stories that are very lucid and very clear in detail. And William Commanda, when he was, 10 years old or whatever, the Indian agents came to put in a school, and where he would be tortured for speaking his language. And his uncle's uncle rescued him and sent him out to the wilderness. I mean, absolute northern Canadian wilderness, to live alone, off the land. And he did for 4 years, so that he wouldn't have to be forced to lose his language. And then after 4 years, he came out of the woods, and he was muscle bound and 6 feet something, and let him drag me to those schools now. Let him see him. I'd like to see him try now. So he never went to those schools. You know, he avoided that trauma, but the trauma was leaving his family and living alone for 4 years. I mean, that wasn't what most people have to do. Anyway, it's great sharing these stories. You know, it's part of this in terms of Pavonia, and you have Itakwa still remembers through her her late husband all these details. So we should all be more sensitized to things that are going on and not say, oh well, it's, you know, just, oh, that's the way it is, and you know, it is what it is, and all that. And what started me interested in Pavonia as something to have an ongoing atonement and recognition and remembrance, just as a realization of that uh, you know, United States, a lot happens here in the United States in a given day, and we can become totally like oversensitized and like, oh, COVID, 500,000 people, oh well, you know, that's life, you know. But we should also remember to be sensitive to the suffering of others and to try to live better. And again, it includes the natural world, which is something our elders have emphasized. So I wanted to, unless somebody has something, Renee, do you have something you want to add to that?
This whole conversation tonight has made me realize that there's still a whole lot that I would love to learn. I have more questions now than I've had in a long time. So just look forward to being able to resume some more informal conversation together. I have questions for you, Itakwa, about the rituals of releasing the spirits and cleansing the land. And there's just a lot you've talked about tonight that I would like to know more about. So I just hope we can do it.
Yes.
Just this kind of talking, you know, I think you had plans for a formal program, but it's been sort of formal, but it's nice to have the space
Thank you.
just to hang out and listen.
Well, thank you to you and Rob for holding that space. I have a book that I was inspired so much by understanding that I wrote this book, the Tappan Keepers of the River Crossings, because the Tappan were Mohican related people, many think related to the Ramapo, who were there. And what happened was there was a murder of a single Dutchman named Klaus Switz, and the Dutch wanted all kinds of you know, revenge or whatever. And again, they could have, but they didn't. And this is what happened. Against the advice of his council of 12 men, Keefe decided to punish the Indians by attacking Pavonia and Corlear's Hook, where well over 100 were taking refuge among the Netherlanders, whom they thought were allies, fleeing raiding Mohawks from the north. The initial strike, which he ordered on February 25th, took place at Communipaw, which is now part of Jersey City, and Corlear's Hook, which is east side of Manhattan. It was a massacre. 129 Dutch soldiers killed 110 natives, including women and children, 80 at Pavonia, another 30 at Corlear's Hook. And Pauw, who was a Dutchman, Pavonia comes from his name, owned 8 miles of the waterfront, and the exact location of his trading post is debated, but there were various ferries, landings at Communipaw and Communipaw Landing, where there was a large village. Paulus Hook, which was then Oyster Island and well established as a ferry landing. This is all in Jersey City. Harsimus Cove, where there had been also an island. Pavonia Landing at the end of the Pavonia Trail. Hoboken Inlet and Castle Point Rock, which is where the Hoboken Rock stood. And some of the refugees were hiding on one of the islands, and that would have either been Oyster Island or Harsimus. And the attack is sometimes referred to as the Pavonia Massacre, because Pauw named it Pavonia after himself. The Native Americans and the Dutch citizens themselves called it the slaughter of the innocents.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where that, so there's a song that I sometimes sing as a kind of a mourning song, a keening song for those who have died. And, but and yet it's very powerful. And I want to sing this song as the eagle song, asking the eagle to hear our prayers. It seems appropriate for this time, because I think our prayers are being heard. And rather than, I guess, having, unless you want to have like a maybe Nick, you want to lead a prayer for us, but let me first sing this song. Yo ho, yo ho, yo honde. 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 Hey, music is cool, talk out a window. Picto washing days keep Picto washing days keep Bet you're gonna what we keep Bet you're gonna what we keep Yahoo, Yahoo, Yahande. 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 Now, one thing we did, and that for me is a very emotional song. One thing we did at the first of the Pavonia gatherings is we handed scissors around. I know you're not prepared, perhaps, but I'm going to cut my hair off because this is how we did it in the first of the Pavonia, Renee. And the symbol in sign language for death is actually the scissors. So I'm going to see if this actually works. If you have scissors, you can join me. So this is my offering to Great Spirit for all my sorrows, but also mentioning that many of our elders have died just recently. And it's appropriate to mention, oh, thank you, make an offering out of that. You know, Grandfather Turtle passed away about 10 days ago, who was the one I wrote about in Lord for Time. He was our adopted stepfather, actually, in a way, virtually. But he was their grandfather Turtle, and he was a part of our family from 1989 onward, and he passed away 10 days ago. And then last Wednesday, Gil Tarbox, known to us as Crying Hawk, passed away, and you know, with his family around him. But it's very sad to lose him. He's right here in our community. He put on powwows every year, and never gave up. He always was trying to do the impossible, and he always did the best he could. Did a tremendous amount for us, and he was very knowledgeable about our local history. And he passed away now. So I also, this hair is also for Gil, for Crying Hawk, for Grandfather Turtle. And we'll say, yes, we say all my relations. And even if you don't have scissors, you can do the sign language. And this expresses how we feel when we think about somebody who's passed away and separated from us. Okay, JD, thank you. It's voluntary, of course. And Gil didn't have any hair at all, so had no complaints. So we're winding up. We are making a recording, and it can be available. I don't want to ask, does anybody have one more thing they want to say? Wahaba? Okay, she's good. Carol?
As we move forward, you know,
Yes.
as a group and talking more and more about reconciliation and continuing reconciliation, I want to kind of close with the Cherokee Unity song.
Okay.
It's pretty easy for everybody to pick it up and do it. So, hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na, hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na, hey na na na, hey na na. Oh.
Oh, all right. Well, that's a pretty good note to end on. And I think that it's probably, Rob, I don't know about you, but in terms of sending the recording out to people, maybe you and I could work on that.
Yes, I can work on getting this to you. I'm also going to try to save the chat. And I wondered if Sally would be so kind to put her contact in the chat. Someone asked for that. They wanted to reach out to Sally.
Okay, so if we don't have your email, we can't send you the recording, just so you know. So what email should they send to, Rob, you think, to find out about it?
So that's right. So if you want a recording, put your email into the chat box.
Yes.
And then we can try to save that and then also distribute it. And some folks who asked for the recording, they so far have put their emails in there. So that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I would just like to say that part of what we'd like to do at the church is to plant a Three Sisters garden in the churchyard. And so at some appropriate time in May, it would be great. We will put a date out, and if people could come on a Saturday and plant that would be wonderful. And also, Evan, we invite you at some point also to come and put on your play. Perhaps once the garden starts to grow.
Yes, the name of my play is The Three Sisters on the Dead Fish. So you're welcome to see it. Anyway, my email is evan.pritchard7@gmail.com. And you can also send to me if you don't have time to put your email address into the chat. You can't email me, and so I'll be sending this out. It does take time to download, so be warned. And also, it's just a wonderful effect that a gathering like this has on you when you open your heart to these stories and to all you're hearing and to understanding that the truth and reconciliation about what Native Americans have experienced in this country in the last 400 years, possibly, like I say, can kind of a heart-opening experience and beneficial to all. So it's not really about guilt. It's about that whole exchange of emotions and love. You see, it's a form of love and, an opening and sharing the oneness, recognizing that we are one on some level. We are all the same species, and that we can feel connected through this kind of sharing, which is very honest and open.
Oh.
Oh. Thank you, Evan.
Okay, thanks everybody. And maybe next
Sally and Paul.
And Sally, and everybody, Sally, Paul, Charlene, JD, Idaquah.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Moonfire. And Nick, especially Nick, thank you.
Anishi,
Thank you, everyone.
Anishi.
Wanashido. Yeah.
Evan, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Would you be interested in joining us on Saturday nights about 5:30 for like drumming and song sharing and learning new songs and teaching new songs?
Well, I'll get back to you. I'll call you about that, okay? Because,
Okay.
you know, Saturdays I might not be available, you know, but I'll call you, okay?
Okay. All
Because
right.
we did that before COVID, right? Remember? Once or
Yes.
twice. It was a lot
Yes.
of fun. Okay,
Yes, it
so
was.
I'll call you in. So everybody, have you just, you know, click
Peace.
off as you wish, and
Thank you. Thank you.
we'll end the
Thank you,
recording.
everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
Manishi.
night.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Bye.
Okay.
So you want to leave?
Yeah, well,
The person who's in charge.
here we go. Okay. Up Namultis. See you later.
Lapik Nawik.
Okay.